So we get a tire change on a King Air 350, and this is the way you change the main wheel tires with a ramp. This is actually in the maintenance manual. It's not like something I made up. And yes, the tire can support the aircraft the whole time it takes you to do a tire change. This allows me to take this tire off without having to jack the aircraft, swap it, and then I'll get the guys back with a tug and they'll lower it back on the ground. And then the next step, of course, is remove the hubcap, which is held on by 3 screws. When you take that cap off, you have your gasket. You want to make sure you don't tear it, but you will want to keep that. And then cotter pin comes off, nut comes off, wheel slides out. This is one time where I would like to have the bigger version of this, but these right here are still the best that you can have for cotter pins, cutting safety wire, anything like that. You snap on with a small head, long reach. They work perfect. And then of course you're not going to beat your Nipex taking this nut off. You will need to use a socket and a torque wrench to put it back on. And then you have your shims. So that's a slotted washer. There's a slot right there. The gauge is a slot right there. And the threads on the axle. Another spacer. Kind of thinking maybe this was put on the wrong way. And then this spacer. I'm really thinking one of these should go on the other side. If they're anything like the Air, I used to maintain a 200. Definitely have to look at the maintenance manual for this. I always want to make sure your stack up is right. Don't trust the last guy that did it. He might have done it wrong. And as soon as you touch the wheel, this bearing is going to come loose because it is not kept captive in the wheel. And then you take your wheel off. I'll do this one-handed. This will be fun. I gotta use 2 hands for this. And here you can see the slots that the brakes engage. Here are the rotors for the brakes, and they have these tabs on them that actually engage the wheel. Pretty much any heavier aircraft will have this type of engagement. It's not bolted on the way it is on a little GA airplane. It will actually be engaged with these slots like this and set up to turn the brakes this way. And these brakes, you got to be careful. There's nothing holding them on but this wheel and this wheel nut, and you can very easily have the O-ring inside of the brake shut, the brake connection right there, come loose and lose your brake fluid and have to bleed the brakes. So you always want to make sure these brakes are held in, are not coming out with the wheel when you're pulling the wheel off. And then your inner bearing, also not attached to the wheel or retained in any way, slide it off. Anytime you do this, of course, you want to take a good look at that axle for dings, scratches, cracks. Dings because they can turn into cracks, cracks because they will cause the axle to crack and fall off, and then you lose the wheel and you lose the brakes on this side. And everybody has a bad day, so you don't want that to happen. So we've got our new part, and the first thing we need to do is verify part number, serial number, and find that on this wheel somewhere. It'll be somewhere in one of these castings, maybe, hopefully. You never really know for sure because there's like a million things cast into these. Inspection 21. That's not it. So there it is. Found the serial number. It is correct. And the thing that makes these numbers so confusing is this wheel is only a half of a wheel. It's not the whole wheel. There's another half. The two of them are bolted together, and then the two of them together become an assembly. So if you look in the parts book, the number that will be given, probably one of those two numbers, but you'll probably never find that number on this wheel because this is a wheel half, not a wheel complete. Sometimes you will find it. I just know from working with Beechcraft that they tend to not have it, depending on if it's a Cleveland or a BF Goodrich, and even different models and whatever. It can be very confusing, but trust your paperwork and make sure the serial number is correct, because that's the important thing, especially. So once you get that done, we want to take grease up our axle, and take our inboard bearing. Let's make sure that's clean like that, Russell. Oh, no rocks or anything got in there, no dirt. Install inboard thing, and I'm going to go check the maintenance manual just to make sure nothing goes underneath that. Oh well, check the manual, and it's actually interesting. They don't show this piece. They show our washer, a keyway washer, and the nut. Don't know. I'll put it back the way I found it, just because I don't have a manual that shows me otherwise. So when you're putting it on, you got to make sure those tabs are engaged in the wheel correctly, and the wheel is sitting straight on the axle. And then you put your inboard bearing in. I mean outboard. And once you get the outboard bearing in place, you need to hold it there, because this wheel is going to try and fall off, and the bearing is going to try and slide out, and you could lose the engagement of your brakes back there if you're not careful. So once you get your nut tightened down by hand, everything will hold together. Now you need your torque wrench and your socket to set the torque correctly according to the book. So I know in the comments on my toolbox and all the adapters I have in the bottom layer, I had somebody asking, why do you need all of those? Well, this is the perfect example. There is a 1 13/16 socket for that nut, and believe it or not, the final torque is 40 inch-pounds. So to get from a 40 inch-pound torque wrench, which you're only going to find in 1/4 inch drive, to a 1 13/16 socket, which I believe that's a 3/4 inch drive, you need a 3/4 to half, or maybe it's a half to 3/8. Yeah, maybe it's a half to 3/8, and then a 3/8 to 1/4 adapter in order to make that stack up, in order to do the torque the way you're supposed to do it. So to get the 40 inch-pound torque reading, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be turning the torque wrench, and then we're also going to be rotating the wheel at the same time to help set the bearings correctly to the running torque. And then we got to see if cotter pin can go through a hole, and we'll have to keep slowly tightening until one of these holes lines up with the castellations in the lock nut. And on some planes, I actually find it takes both hands to hold the torque wrench and hold the socket on the nut. I will actually use my head or my shoulder, depending on the size, to rotate the wheel in the same direction I'm tightening in order to get the torque set correctly. And of course, since that requires more hands than I have, I can't show that on video, but I'm pretty sure you can figure it out if you ever need to. So I've got the torque, the cotter pin installed, the nut is torqued, cut the ears, bent them so everything clears. Then we got our hubcap and our seal, and then we have to inflate, because as you notice, 20 psi, and I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be 90. I'm going to have to double check the paperwork, but I believe that's what it's inflated to. So I'm going to have to inflate that before I can put this back on the ground. So with everything tight, we're going to do a rock check just to make sure we can't feel any play in the bearings, and give it a spin just to make sure it all rolls freely. You're going to hear some friction. That's the multi-segmented brake rotors. They never roll entirely free and clear. It's just part of the design. Gear comes down off the ramp. Nice as you please. A little bit more. Needs to go a little more. That's good. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we're checking King Air brake wear. with a slotted type of brake. And quick and easy way that I found, and these have to be pretty standard or else they're not going to engage your Allen keys correctly. Just figure out your dimension, then use an Allen wrench and see if it will slip into that gap or not. Now on this one, it's getting close to the maximum dimension. It's not there yet, because that is a 5/32. On this one, it doesn't even go in, so that's still good. And then this one right here, I think 0.19 something, 197 or something like that is like the maximum you can go. And I know this company that I'm dealing with right now, they want 0.19 to be something that you notify them so they can keep an eye on it. But the maximum doesn't fit in there, so it is still good. And then obviously this doesn't fit in here either, so we'll get the decimal equivalent of this and figure out our numbers. That's just a quick and easy way to check them versus some sort of a calibrated standard or something like that, because you will have a set of these in your tool case or your tool bag or whatever if you do aircraft maintenance.